Hello everybody and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be doing actually a little bit of a different video than I have been doing in the past. Most of the time I follow scripts. I kind of go through these different points that I have laid out. This is going to be a little bit more of a conversational video where I'm just kind of reading out my thoughts. I just said I didn't have a script. Where I'm kind of talking out my thoughts and just sort of laying out my ideas for a certain topic. And for today, that's actually going to be the topic of how to create a compelling narrative with your characters. And I'm going to split it up into two sections. First of all, I'm going to talk about player characters. So for the first part of this, I'm just going to talk about, hey, I'm a player at a table. How can I create a compelling narrative with my character and the other characters here? And then the second part, I'm going to be talking as a DM for NPCs and how you can create a better character. And I will probably create some offshoots of this video, assuming that it's something that I want to do, but there's a lot of topics I can go on this. But for now, I'm just going to start with the basics. So let's begin. Player characters. Now, when creating a compelling narrative for a player character, first thing I've got to touch on is what do I consider to be a compelling narrative? When I run games, I am a long-term dungeon master. I have been DMing, well, as long as I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons. The first time I ever played was a bunch of friends of mine wanted to try it out. I had never played. We all went to the game store. We didn't really know what it was at the time. We just picked up a starter set and I volunteered to be the dungeon master with the assumption that we would rotate out who would be the dungeon master every week. Obviously, that didn't happen. That's not really how the game is typically run. So I ended up just taking over as the dungeon master, and I ran a 2-year campaign, well, a little bit over 2 years, for my first ever game of D&D. I just ran it off the seat of my pants, not knowing what I was doing. That was a lot of fun, but I learned a lot of lessons in that time. And I learned that one of the things I care most about in D&D is creating a story that is compelling for the players and makes them care about the game even out of session. And so that's the thing that I most cared about. And so I really care about creating a compelling narrative which draws players in and causes them to think about it and causes them to think not just about the game, but the future and things they want their characters to do story-wise. Not necessarily mechanics-wise. As a paladin, we all want to get a nat 20 in smite, okay? Every paladin wants to do that. But there's that, and then there's also thinking, I really want my paladin to have a moment where they have to make a hard decision and really commit to their oath. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about when creating a compelling narrative. Something that is character-driven, that really inspires the players to dive? Really? I need to replace my brain. Deep dive into who their character is and what they want them to be and kind of move forward from there. That's something that really is inspiring to me and I'm planning on talking about in this video. So as a player, which I have been a player and also a over 2-year-long campaign, I did that right after, well, I started it while still running my other campaign and then eventually, that campaign ended, but I continued playing as a player in a different campaign for over 2 years with a different group. And I found that I really like to create deep and compelling characters. That's really what mattered to me and for the rest of the people in that group. And so in order to create a compelling character, I basically just go through a few different thought processes and I'm just going to kind of lay them all out. Number one is when I'm creating the character, I have a few questions I ask myself. First question that I ask myself, what does this character want? And that is something that's not groundbreaking. I'm not sitting here going, ooh, ho, ho, pat myself on the back. I'm the only one who does it. I know everybody who creates a character does it. You create a character and you want to know what they want because that's the driving force. But I also followed up with another one, and this is a pretty common literary concept, but it's figuring out what your character wants versus what they need. And this is something that I think anybody who's worth their salt with any sort of writing or storytelling will know. And if you don't, hey, congrats. I'm so glad that I'm throwing this out, but this is not a concept that I've created. But the need is what the character needs in order to grow and become a better person. The want is what the character thinks that they need, right? And so for the first character that I created, he was an artificer, dragonborn. This was actually before the artificer class was officially released, so I was playing the janky Unearthed Arcana artificer for a while. He wanted to avenge himself. Basically, he had been sold, well, not even sold, he'd been kidnapped by a crime syndicate and made into a weapon and forced to work for them. So all he wanted was vengeance, and he wanted to kill the man who caused this and get his life back. Now, obviously, that was a good thing to get away from this man, but over the course of the campaign, what he learned, what he needed was not to kill this man. What he needed was to get away from him and no longer let this man affect his life in whatever way that meant. And ultimately, his character arc ended with them finally hunting down this man. They got him down. They actually let my character walk up with his gun and point it at this NPC who had ruined his life. And my character in that moment decided, I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to let myself be consumed by this vengeance, because that is only admitting to you that you have the right to continue to have any control over my life. And that was the culmination of his character arc. So at the beginning, all he wanted was vengeance. But what he needed was to admit and understand that this man had no right to have any control over his life. And that also led to a really cool character moment where my character got to walk away and fall over unconscious because they'd had a really rough battle, whatever. And one of the other player characters got to step up and kill this NPC for him so that he could no longer continue to ruin his life. And that was really cool, because this character, that was a moment for them to step up and take control of this and be able to show themselves as a leader. So I think that's really cool. Finding what your character wants when you first create them, but also finding what they need, I think can be really, really cool, especially if you let your dungeon master know that ahead of time. Because if they're like me and they like creating a fun narrative that's focused on the characters, they can run with that. Which, by the way, DMs who focus a little bit more on other things, world building, combat, mechanics, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I just like focusing on a narrative. There are so many different styles of DMing out there, and none of them are wrong, okay? It's just about finding the one that works for your group. But I really like focusing on the narrative. The second thing that I do whenever I'm creating a character is I go ahead and I look at their mechanics. And again, I know I'm not breaking any new ground with this, but I look at the mechanics as oftentimes secondary to the type of character I want to create. I mean, D&D players do this all the time. You go watch a movie, you watch a TV show, you read a book, you see a character and you're like, oh, yeah, baby, that's the character I want to create right there. And you go find what can fit that character. You go find the subclass, the class, the feats. I mean, there's a whole YouTube channel out there called Tulok the Barbarian that just focuses on doing that. I love that channel. I watch it all the time. And so a lot of the times I figure out what kind of character I want to create. But the thing that I fell into the trap of and have now actively tried to avoid is, once I've created the mechanics of the kind of character I want to create, I try super, super hard not to be that character. I try to let my character explore and find out who they are exactly. Because, well, I'll use Pirates of the Caribbean as an example. Jack Sparrow is a phenomenal character, okay? Like, truthfully, I think that's honestly Johnny Depp's magnum opus is Jack Sparrow. The way he created that character, his mannerisms, his actions. Oh, just a great character. So well written. I love him. But as time goes on, a lot of the criticism that came to the Pirates franchise as more movies came out was that he slowly became a parody of himself rather than the Jack Sparrow we saw in the original, which is true. And that's what happens if you try to be another character. You just end up being a parody of them, and it feels disingenuous. So I really prefer, yes, this is the vibe of the character I want to go for, but then slowly figuring out what else I can do and let the character breathe. My lizards are being so loud behind me, I'm sorry. But dude, do you mind? Sorry, I have two bearded dragons and they can be loud sometimes, just surprising. But I like to let the character breathe and figure out who they are, and don't just try to be this one character. Let the character breathe and figure out who they are. And then the other thing that I do to create a compelling character is I look at every single one of the other characters in the party, and I try and figure out one thing about them that my character wants to know. So in the original campaign that I played as a player in, we had several different people. We had a very shy wizard, we had a very bombastic warrior with a lot of anger management issues, and we had a very charming warlock who was the kind of smooth talking dad of the group, essentially. And I looked at each of them and I tried to figure out which of them or what aspects of them my character really wanted to know about. So for the wizard, it was easy. He was an artificer. There was a wizard. Their intelligence was matched with each other. They both had maxed out intelligence very early on in the campaign. So he wanted to know what made her tick and what she knew about magic. For the fighter, he was so curious as to where her passion came from, and he wanted to know exactly why she was so passionate about things. And for the warlock, basically he wanted to know what the warlock wasn't telling them, because the warlock was super secretive, and for the majority of the campaign didn't share his backstory. But that's kind of where I was at with that. And so doing that allows you to constantly be on the lookout for the other characters, looking at where's an opportunity where I can learn more about them. What is it I can figure out? How can these characters have a relationship? And so because of that, they're always on your radar, and you're never really stealing the spotlight because you're always watching to see them in the spotlight to learn those things. And I think that can be really, really a good tool in order to be able to learn that kind of stuff. So with that out of the way, let's move on to DMs, right? NPCs. I, as a DM, rely on NPCs as my largest tool for creating an interesting game. NPCs inform the world, they inform the players, they give the players a chance to interact with other characters that are not themselves, and they allow you to be able to create what's called a foil for the characters. A foil is almost a dark mirror of the character, a version of them that they could be if they allowed themselves to give into certain tendencies. And that, I think, can be super fun. In the first campaign I ran, one of the players played a sorcerer, and this sorcerer was an Aasimar, so he had angelic presence, and he was also a shadow sorcerer because he had been touched by the void. It was a whole thing. But as he was learning about his heritage, he met another Aasimar. Now this one was a College of Shadows bard, so they were actually very similar to each other. But the difference between them was she allowed herself to give into these tendencies of shadows, and she was very manipulative, and she was very haughty. And it was very interesting because they compared against each other and actually ended up fighting against each other in a tournament. And there was this understanding that the other represented the kind of parts of them that they didn't like. And over time, they actually did end up becoming friends, and she fought alongside them in the end battle of the campaign. But it was a very interesting dynamic to deal with, and NPCs can be super fun at helping your players look at their own characters and find out things about them. So when creating an NPC, here's the first thing that I would do. Consider if you're making a DMPC. DMPCs are basically an NPC that acts as the DM's player character, and they have a lot of stereotypes around them. A lot of times they're considered to be overpowered or the Mary Sue of the campaign, and that can be really a hard trap to fall into. I have created DMPCs before. Matthew Mercer, Holy Saint of DMs, he has created DMPCs to his own admittance. It is not a bad thing to do as long as you do it right. A DMPC is the character that you relate with as an NPC. They can be powerful, they can be super cool, but they must never take away agency nor the spotlight for your players. And that is a hard balance to hit. I created some DMPCs in the first campaign I ran, and I had to learn to not let them get in the way of the players. But I also did want them to come off as competent because they were supposed to be allies to these players. I didn't want them to think they were useless. And so a lot of the times, my suggestion would be to take these NPCs, even if they're super powerful or cool, and give them something else to do that allows the players to shine. One of the earliest on NPCs that I introduced was a wizard named Dalen. And he was not my DMPC. He was just a powerful wizard, right? But I did end up playing him quite a bit as the players relied on him, and the aforementioned sorcerer actually looked at him as a mentor. And so this haughty wizard did eventually begin working alongside them for a few different things, but they asked him quite a few times to go out on adventures with him, and he said no every time because he had something else to do. But I always allowed that something else that he was doing to be beneficial to the party. He was trying to do some research, but then he would share it with them later. Or he was trying to find a magical item, which he would then show them and even potentially sell to them. It always related back to, hey, I am helping you guys out. I'm just not going to do this adventure for you because that's not fun for the players. In fact, on that note, there was another wizard in the campaign, and they were a shopkeep that they went to for a while, and she was a very powerful wizard named Zex. And she was the quintessential overpowered anime protagonist. Super powerful wizard, was secretly a metallic dragon in disguise alongside a whole group of metallic dragons that she had. She was a well-known, powerful adventurer. I mean, there was so much about her that was just ridiculous. And for a while, I kept her just out of the story. She was a shopkeep, and that was it, because she had retired from adventuring and she didn't want to do any of that. And I kept her that way for a long time. But eventually, there was a storyline where she had to get involved because there was no reason she wouldn't. And so in order to not undermine the players, because at this point the players were, they were getting to that point of power where they could almost rival at least her, but not her whole party. They were in a lich's lair, and they were going to go fight this lich. And I had the lich summon this abomination of a Draco-lich that they were planning to use to kill the party. The Draco-lich was not the main encounter. They had no care. It was just this random monster that had popped up out of nowhere. The lich they had encountered many times and had personal beef with. So I had Zex and her party distract the Draco-lich and go fight it elsewhere. Super cool. I mean, they are very powerful, doing something very impressive, but it was out of the way and not as important because the players got to fight the lich themselves, who was the real threat in this case, and fight the person that they had personal beef with. That way, these NPCs I created who were very powerful were not taking away agency or the moment away from the players, because the story is about the players. They were supportive, yes, they showed their power, but they didn't take anything away from them. And the players were able to fight this lich and have a super amazing climactic battle that was probably the most rough and brutal of the campaign, that ended in a very satisfying way, which actually did end up ultimately killing one of the players because they got power word killed by the lich's phylactery afterwards. It's okay, they ended up bringing him back. So if you're going to create a super powerful NPC, please don't let it take anything from the players. Never take a moment away. Only let them support the players. In fact, in the final battle, those NPCs did show back up in their true draconic forms, but they just allowed the players to ride them. And they did make some attacks, but at that point it was all on the players. The only thing they were doing was allowing the players to ride them, which is a big honor, riding a dragon, a metallic dragon, but it didn't take away anything from them. It was only supportive. So I was rambling a ton there, but let the NPCs support the characters. Don't take anything away from them. And then I would really use your NPCs to world build. Use them to challenge your other player characters. If a player character has a certain notion, like for example, I'm gonna go back to the sorcerer. Wow, I'm using the sorcerer a lot in this video. The sorcerer was racist towards tieflings because he had a long beef with them, right? And I actually never got to challenge that. And he did eventually start to learn, but I never personally challenged that because there was just so much going on in the campaign. And I wish I had introduced a tiefling NPC who could have challenged that belief. And that would have been a really interesting thing to go. On that note, we had a warlock in our campaign who just had a lot of petty beliefs about his home and his family. And when he eventually was confronted with them, he actually found out that he had been led astray by a lie from a pit fiend for a long time. And so it turned out that all of his negative thoughts about these people were not necessarily true. So when you create an NPC and you want them to develop the world, have them challenge some of the beliefs that the PCs have so that it creates a more interesting dynamic. Truthfully, I don't think this video is going to be super good. I am just rambling at this point, but hopefully maybe a few of the thoughts can help you guys out. It was really just me wanting to put this stuff out there. I think I'm going to create more detailed videos with some of these topics in mind and actually give a little bit better information. But this was just me really wanting to get something out there because it'd been on my mind. So hopefully you all enjoyed it. I hope that you all have a wonderful day. Live your life to the fullest. Don't let the world get you down. And don't forget to play your role. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.